All right, this is the appointed hour. Well, good morning, one and all. Welcome to the Florida Economic Development Council's April Professional Development Opportunity. I'm Casey Barnes, Regional Market and Economic Development Leader for BRPH, Architects and Engineers. I'm also Chair of FEDC for 2025 and 26. Attracting private investment into low-income and underserved communities is a goal that every economic development practitioner aspires to, and it isn't always the easiest goal to achieve. Today, we have a wonderful opportunity to delve into the intricacies of a program we all may know about, but not too much about, called the New Market Tax Credit. The program was designed to attract investment into some of our most challenged communities. To facilitate this, we have three experts from Ryan, an award-winning global tax services firm providing an integrated suite of federal, state, local, and international tax services.
Hi,
FEDC
welcome.
has enjoyed working with Ryan over many, many years and is looking forward to having Aaliyah Newbold, Principal of Credits and Incentives, with us at Ignite in May. I hope to see you guys there too. Welcome, Aaliyah. And before I turn it over to you, I will uh, remind everyone that there will be a chat feature, and you guys are all encouraged to use that chat feature to your heart's delight. And we'll take questions at the end. With that, I'll turn it over to your capable hands, Aaliyah. Thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you, Casey. I'm excited to see everyone at the Ignite conference, which will be here before we know it in May. And super excited to introduce Scott Sheffy and Brooke Edwards from Ryan's New Market Tax Credits team. We only have an hour today. We're also giving time for questions, and we're working with Casey and Beth and Mary to actually schedule a full day workshop if you're wanting to know even more about new market tax credits. So super excited. So stay tuned more for that because you'll see we'll just be touching the surface in this kind of 1 hour presentation. But as I mentioned, I have Scott Sheffy and Brooke Edwards joining us today. If you're not familiar with Ryan, we're a global services firm with several offices in Florida. I happen to be based in our Tampa, Florida office. I've been in Florida for 20 years and with Ryan for 15 years. We also have Orlando, Jacksonville, St. Pete, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, as well as 40 other offices nationwide. But we have a good Florida representation here. So I'm excited to share that with the team as well. You may not have heard of Ryan because a lot of our names not on the Florida buildings, for example, but we have almost 7,000 professionals globally, and we've been around for 35 years. Taxes, for those of you familiar, can cover a wide range from state tax, income tax, property tax, sales tax. This team today is part of our credits and incentives group. Typically, we're just an extension of our client, helping them from a financial analysis perspective. And new markets will definitely impact the finances of a project. And we'll sort of go through how do you qualify and what the benefits of new market tax credits are shortly with Scott. But the key takeaways are what are they and what aren't they? What are the players? There's going to be a lot of acronyms. We'll give an acronym cheat sheet during the workshop, but it would almost be take up half the time to go through all the acronyms. But the key ones are NMTC, New Market Tax Credits. You'll hear CDE, Community Development Entity, and that just to name two of them. But also, what value can a business receive? I think you probably know by now, because New Markets has been around for 20 plus years. Not every project can qualify, and even the ones that are in a qualified area can necessarily receive a benefit from it. But it can be a very powerful tool, especially as we were preparing for this meeting with Casey. He mentioned, you need everything you can get in Florida, and this doesn't cost the state anything. At this point, we don't have a state credit, but if you're meeting with your local legislatures and wanting to know what can Florida do for economic development, obviously QTI won't be coming back, but you could look at doing a state new market tax credit. But I'm already taking up part of Scott's time, so I'll kind of turn it over to you, Scott, to get into some of the details, and then Brooke will highlight more of the financing aspects. But take it away, Scott.
Thanks, Aaliyah. I'm sure everybody knows, but when the federal government wants to emphasize a certain type of behavior, they often provide tax credits to those willing to engage in that behavior. I'm sure we see that all across the board in our everyday lives. If you want to reuse the buildings that we already have, we created the historic rehab tax credit to help people get to help get private dollars into the affordable housing space so that the federal government can get out of the business of directly investing in housing. We created the low income housing tax credit. Since the low income housing tax credits were so popular and they have given so many people a safe place, safe, clean places to live at affordable rates, what if we also gave them economic opportunity? And that was really the genesis of the New Market Tax Credit program. It was created in the year 2000 at the end of the Clinton administration. It is overseen by the U.S. Treasury Department, and it's intended to direct private dollars towards improving socioeconomic outcomes in underserved areas. It's a 7-year, 39% credit. But unlike other tax credit programs, the direct tax benefit is not taken by the business. How it works is that these tax credits are sold to banks by acronym that Aaliyah mentioned, community development entities or CDEs. And those proceeds of that sale are used to fund loans of roughly 15 to 20% of capital costs at below market rates, with these 15 to 20% loans often being forgiven at the end of the 7-year compliance period. So they have that cancel option, whereby somebody pays roughly $1,000 for it to go away. Um, So, as you saw on the previous slide, the Treasury awards $5 billion in allocation authority per year. This past year, the Treasury happened to fund 2 rounds of this funding at once for a total of $10 billion. This went to roughly 140 CDEs. These entities, these community development entities, they are domestic partnerships or corporations with the primary mission of improving low-income communities within their geographic footprint. They are the gatekeepers of these federal funds. Every year, roughly 200 to 250 CDEs apply for this funding, and about 100 are successful. In this application, the CDE states to the Treasury, these are the types of projects that I will do if I receive this funding. And then it spends the rest of the, oh, I'm sorry, assuming that they are successful and they are awarded, it spends the rest of the year trying to put those funds to work in the types of projects that they told the federal government they would fund. So because of this application process is really one of the primary and a very effective policing mechanism for this program. Because if you get out of line with what you've told the US Treasury that you're going to do, the next time that you apply, they'll probably discount, or maybe not believe you in a boy crying wolf sense, and you may be less likely to receive that funding going forward. You run the risk of kind of getting in the penalty box or sitting out multiple funding rounds. Obviously, each one of these CDEs is going to have its own kind of business strategy, and that often includes some sort of fee structure. So, in sitting out a year, they run the risk of losing revenue for some longer period of time than they had originally anticipated. So to better understand the current market of the new markets landscape, as I mentioned, the most recent funding round of $10 billion went to 142 CDEs. We've mentioned here that what's important to you, three of those CDEs are located in Florida, and then another 63 of them either serve a multi-state or a national footprint that includes Florida. So these are the kind of entities that are looking for projects in your state. Right now, these CDEs are hunting for what they consider high impact job creating projects. And some of that emphasis is going to go to maybe rural areas in order to use their funding. The next application is currently, the timeline for the next application is currently uncertain. Although we expect within the industry that it will soon be announced within maybe the next month or two. And a lot of the feedback that we have received thus far from the federal government is that the next round will put even greater emphasis on rural manufacturing projects, as well as projects that can improve home affordability. So we're really looking forward to seeing what that looks like in the federal government's eyes. And I think we're expecting that there will be more changes coming thereafter. But with this initial next round, that's what we're anticipating seeing a little bit differently in our world. So, what exactly is a CDE and what does it do? As I mentioned, it's a domestic partnership or corporation. It's going to try to serve the low income communities within its geographic footprint. So, it's very mission oriented. And I also mentioned that every year they're going to apply for this funding. And that application is going to contain details about their strategy. So there's different components of their strategy. They, will break it down by geographies, project types, business types. You'll see here that geography, they can designate, as I mentioned earlier, a national or regional presence, or sometimes even local or countywide uh, 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 geographic footprint. And then within the national and regional, I mentioned metro, non-metropolitan, rural, non-rural, urban. These are different kinds of levers that the CDE can pull from a strategy standpoint when it is applying for more funding. The project types that we see probably most often, they generally fall into like a manufacturing or heavy industrial type project, healthcare projects, or community facilities. Then within community facilities or kind of nonprofit projects, we see a lot of food banks, we see a lot of wraparound homeless support projects, and then we see a lot of educational support projects, oftentimes maybe some charter schools. And then as far as business types go, these can be real estate developments. So that is really, developed real estate for the intent of leasing to different commercial, different commercial reasons, or an operating business. Now, I mentioned real estate developments for the purpose of leasing, but within the operating business umbrella, you can actually finance owner-occupied real estate within that, technically considered an operating business, not a real estate development. So, also within operating businesses, we see equipment, other fixed assets, oftentimes will be financed. And then reasonable amounts of working capital could be another thing that a CDE tries to target with the allocation that it receives. So you may be wondering how new market tax credits have impacted the state of Florida. So since 2003, and this is data up until 2024, but if you humor me, since 2003, at least 266 projects have been financed with $3.6 billion of funding. This, as you can see, has resulted in over 18,000 full-time jobs, over 16,000 temporary or construction jobs. 39 of the projects have gone to expanding healthcare access, and 70 manufacturing and industrial projects. Of these projects, Super Puffed Snacks in Perry, Florida, created 275 jobs by expanding into a facility that had recently shut down and had laid off 250 employees. Actually, the loss of those jobs caused the city of Perry to have to reduce its operating budget by 6%. With the new market tax credit financing, Superpuffed was able to move into this space and increase its operating capacity to add those jobs. It actually more than replenished those jobs. It also brought 122 existing jobs to that facility that were currently already working at the other Superpuffed, the former Superpuffed site. So it brought well, in that case, I guess 370, you know, wage earning individuals into an area that may have lacked access to as much economic opportunity. So what previously had 250 jobs in that area now had another 150, 170 jobs. So really exciting. And that's really what the purpose of the program is to get these dollars and get economic activity in these areas that have traditionally lacked access to that economic opportunity. There are a number of other projects that have been done within the state. I mentioned earlier nonprofits, homeless wraparound support. I had previously worked on a project in the Tampa area called Metropolitan Ministries that does a lot of wraparound support to help people out of homelessness and provide services, social services to those individuals. And I know that a number of food banks have also been done. So just wanted to provide you some examples of what can happen in Florida with new markets. I know that we're all in the economic development world, but the nonprofit side of that definitely improves these local communities, which can really benefit in your economic development outreach as well, because it helps to maybe cure some of the ills that may be suffering your local community. So anyway, just wanted to point out the nonprofits are also an avenue that can receive this funding. So just, I guess this is a nice little summary slide here because, just remember that the Treasury is going to award these CDEs, who will then go out and find the qualifying projects. And then with these new markets tax credits, the benefit is provided to those projects, those businesses, with generous terms, low interest rate debt, forgivable debt, to help maybe smooth some of the edges of traditional underwriting, to make the project maybe a little bit more flexible from an economic standpoint, to give it maybe a little bit longer of a runway to get up and going. And so that's the idea, is that this new markets tax credit provides a little bit extra capital to kind of give a project maybe a little bit longer runway to get up and running. So that's just a summary of the intention of the program and really how we get to the point where we are now spending dollars on projects. So what makes a compelling project? This is not necessarily a rule of thumb. This is just from my experience. But in general, a CDE wants to see a quantifiable, demonstrable impact. They want to know that you're going to be able to, the project is going to be able to measure its success, so that when the CDE has to tell the federal government what it's done with its funding, it has data that it can provide. There are costs associated with closing a new markets deal. They are paid out of the proceeds of the new markets. But in general, because of the kind of economy of scale associated with those expenses, projects of at least $8 million of cost really have reached that economy of scale. And so anything below that, you're probably going to take a higher percentage of your the gross benefit, the equitization of those tax credits. And so we like to say generally at $8 million is when it starts to make more sense for a business. Um, I mentioned earlier the hard asset and the working capital financing. That's generally what's going to want to be seen. That money needs to be spent within that low income community. It generally needs to stay within that low income community, which is why hard assets, real estate are often what we see financed through new markets. I just mentioned it needs to be located in that low income community. And we'll get a little bit later into what a low income community is. There's a technical definition around it. And then they want to make sure that that project has its other financing sources lined up. Why this is important is, as I mentioned, these CDEs are really going through this annual application process. And so, in order to receive the next year's credits, you have to spend this year's money. And in order to do that, projects need to have those other financing sources lined up. Otherwise, a CDE is going to redirect those credits to something that can get done quicker so that it can reapply for more credits and continue to kind of echo its impact through its low income communities. So those five compelling components are really what takes a project from technically qualifying to really attracting the new market tax credit investment. What do we see those typically look like? So when you combine all of those, the common impacts that we see are creating quality and accessible jobs, encouraging economic growth through wages, expanding access to fresh foods, providing healthcare to the medically underserved, or fostering access to education for students. This is not, the end all be all list. These are the ones that we see. And when you think about overlaying that quantifiable, demonstrable impact component to this, you can see how each one of these bullet points probably has some distinct measure that helps to quantify its impact. Expanding access to fresh foods, that community may be on a list of inaccessible fresh foods. Now you would increase access to that neighboring community. And so you would have that populations, which you could discuss. Quality, accessible jobs is very easy. There's definitions of quality and accessible. They're two separate components. But it's very easy to quantify those jobs, right? And then tracking what those jobs may be paying is a way to figure out whether or not they're quality. Providing healthcare to the medically underserved. There are federal databases where you can tell which communities are less served by traditional healthcare. And then fostering access to education for students. This is quite obvious as well, but based on student enrollment at charter schools, maybe in a failing school area, providing that opportunity to education to X number of students is another great way to be able to quantify those impacts. So what trends are we seeing right now? I did kind of touch on it a little bit in the kind of the trade winds that I guess the new markets world is experiencing, but manufacturing and healthcare are dominating the market. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Healthcare again, with the expense of healthcare, any subsidy that can come into that area is generally going to be helpful for underserved communities. Affordable housing, food scarcity have jumped in popularity. I mentioned that affordable housing is one of the kind of indicative changes that we see coming in this space. And then those are, I guess, where we are seeing momentum. We are seeing some retraction. Originally, in the early days of the program, retail and mixed-use projects were financed more often because of for different reasons. Those are less often financed now. And then education and arts, we continue to see decent attention levels from CDEs in those spaces. education and arts can be quite broad. So, that could be job training, that could be charter schools, that could be children's museums. So it is quite broad, but we do still see the right mixtures of that receiving decent attention levels for allocation from CDEs. Sorry, I'm gonna take a break and drink some water. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, projects need to be located in low-income communities. So, what are low-income communities? Low-income communities are census tracts that have at least, and this is a statutory definition. So, with at least 20% poverty rate or under 80% median family income. Most all of the CDEs that are successful in winning allocation, though, have committed that a certain percentage, it's generally over 75% of their allocation, needs to go to areas that are experiencing even higher or deeper distress. These measures are here on the slides, but it's essentially the regular qualification status on steroids, right? So a higher distress tract is going to have a poverty rate above 30%, median family income below 60. They also have unemployment rates that are higher than national, non-metropolitan counties, and then there's some other secondary criteria as well. Um, I'm sorry. And then the deeper distress is a new technical definition, but I've outlined those thresholds there in bold. But poverty rates of 40%, median family income 40%, and then 2.5 times the unemployment rate. Over here on the slide is a picture of the state of Florida. Obviously, it's very hard once you get to urban areas to show that on a statewide basis, but purple tracks are deep distress, red tracks are high distress, and then yellow tracks are technically qualifying as low income communities, and then gray does not qualify for new markets. This is information, this is based on the 2020 census. We anticipate that in 2025, or excuse me, based upon the 2025 census, that these tracks will be changing. We don't know when that's going to be implemented. We obviously know that 2025 is in the past. Maybe around this time next year is when they'll start to implement. They'll phase one out, phase one in, and there'll be some overlapping period where you can qualify under either one. But we don't know when that is yet. So there are other geographies that the Treasury wants to direct investment to, and these are non-metro areas and underserved states. Over 20% of the recent 10 billion in awards were designated to go to non-metro areas like this map on the screen. These underserved state requirement has also been an attempt to increase parity on a per capita basis for this funding mechanism. You'll see that the 10 underserved states for the most recent round does include Florida. Florida has probably been on this list for the past 10 or so years because it's a per capita basis, and Florida's got a large population of low income persons. And so probably will be here for the foreseeable future. The good news for y'all is that CDEs, in order to kind of earn bonus points on their application with the Treasury, will commit to a certain percentage of their allocation going to these states. And so with 63 national CDEs that have Florida on their radar, if they've committed to this underserved state requirement, they are more than likely going to want to see projects in these states first. So that is very beneficial to you, to your projects. I've just launched a whole lot of information at your head, and I hope that I've gotten you up to speed on the details. But now I'm going to turn it over to Brooke to kind of walk you through how they work and how, more importantly, how the projects can receive the value of the new markets.
All right, thanks, Scott. So when we talk to a company Here's what we highlight to them when we discuss the project's capital stack. So you'll see three different circles here. 15% is the equity funds that come from new markets. The 85% is what they will be bringing to the table, and that includes their equity, maybe some borrowed funds, potential grants, and then other public dollars like incentives that might be offered by the EDC. And this makes up the full capital budget. So they are able to have a 100% capital budget that runs through the new market structure at close, which is by way of this low interest rate debt or subordinate positioning or a portion of principal that may be effectively forgiven at the end of the 7 years of compliance. I want to show you guys how it works when we talk about including new markets funding in a project's capital stack. This is what we would show to a CFO when they come to us with a project. So this is a hypothetical project. It's a plastic container manufacturer. They are adding a state-of-the-art no waste production line to its existing facility in a Northwest Florida area. It's saying we're going to be adding 20 million for this project and capital investment, 80,000 square feet expansion, 125 new quality and accessible jobs. So as you can see here, this is maybe their budget that a CFO would run through. This is the building cost, this is the equipment, this is the working capital. Here's our sources. We got bank debt borrowing, 15 million dollars. We're bringing cash equity to the table, and then we also have incentives from the locale helping us with this expansion. On the right-hand side, you can see for a new markets tax credit budget, what happens is when you add in the very bottom where it says project sources, it says NMTC net benefit. That's $3.14 million that comes in from new markets tax credit, where the company now actually gets to borrow less. They're only now having to borrow 11.8 million with new markets included in their capital stack, when previous it was 15 million. So that's a significant savings to that business with the equity that comes in up front, and that's a cash benefit that they get to utilize for their project within the first 12 months. This is just another visual of what this looks like for our visual learners. I show it here with bank debt being 15 million on the right-hand side, excuse me, the left-hand side, budget of 4 in cash, and then the incentives being 1 million. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that turquoise color is the net cash benefit that comes in, including new markets tax credits in the mix. So that's $3.14 million that comes to the business within that capital stack. So on this slide, we've summarized some of the most common questions we hear from CFOs, from CEOs, even from EDCs, just better understanding how new markets really works here. So we're just going to run through a couple of the most common ones, and we'll get to, I'm sure, more of the questions here at the end of the presentation. But first, really, how much is that benefit? So as we've highlighted, it's typically about 15 to 20% of a total project cost. So as I mentioned, we'll say on a $10 million project, that'll look like $1 million to $1.5 million in net benefit that comes to the project. When do they typically receive these funds? This happens at close, and they generally need to be deployed within about 12 months. So as Scott has mentioned, generally what makes a project competitive, well, it really comes down to strong job creation. So a lot of EDCs, we want to see good quality, well-paying jobs coming into an area. Meaningful community impact, that can look like those jobs, but that can also look like community services that are being expanded. As Scott had mentioned, food, a grocer coming into a food desert, or a charter school coming into a lower income area where education is quite strained. And so this typical projects in that mix will be between 8 million to about 50 million. So we don't really see projects much larger than 50 million. Because at that point, CDEs start to question, well, why does the project really need new markets tax credit funding if it's a $50 million project? So we typically work with companies to pursue the new markets tax credit funding that range between an $8 million project to about a $50 million project. Eligible costs are pretty broad, so we usually see that with land, with the construction of the building, equipment purchases, like we had mentioned, if there's an expansion of an existing line, or if there's an additional 80,000 square feet coming in. All the equipment, all the construction can be included as part of the project costs, and even some soft costs. We think inventory purchase, or we think payroll. Some of those things can be included as working capital costs. And then finally, oh, excuse me, and importantly, we do also want to mention, especially with this group, that new markets can absolutely be layered with other incentives like abatements, like grants or TIF. We just want to caveat and kind of make a note that as long as the EDC, fully knows and understands that incentive inside and out, they can work alongside us as a consultant to be able to make sure it's a good fit, to be an incentive layered with new markets for that project or for that company to make sure that it just aligns well with the requirements, the technical requirements of that incentive. And then finally, yes, they do have to repay the funds. It is structured as debt. It's very favorable. And then we always tell companies that a portion is forgiven after the 7-year compliance period. And that time frame that we typically will market a project to the CDEs is between 6 to 12 months of going to the conferences and being front and center with the CDEs to be able to articulate the value that that project's going to bring to the local community it serves. So, with that foundation, I'm going to walk you through how Ryan actually supports projects through this process. And I want to start because you can see there's 5 different phases that we'll work with a project through, but really there's a phase 0 here, and that's where the EDCs will be. So, working with the EDCs is really just to understand identifying the locations in the community that are eligible, like on Scott's map, the different low income communities that are in deep distress, the purple tracks, the red tracks being severe distress. So an EDC and different developer partners can look and see where their project location is, if it's eligible and it's in an eligible census tract. And then, that's helping start those discussions with the project. If they want to work alongside Ryan and help consultant come in to help support the company understanding new markets eligibility, that's where we start with that phase 1, understanding the demographics and the community impacts and being able to create and curate the marketing materials, as I mentioned, that we'll take out to the market, to the CDEs, to articulate the benefit, the value to the community, and those larger impacts from an economic standpoint to help revitalize that area with that project. Phase 2, this is when we are just sharing industry knowledge and reaching out to these CDEs. We're targeting specific CDEs based on their location, based on their strategy. Scott had mentioned there's about 63 winners that are nationally that do projects all across the United States, including Florida. So Ryan has historic experience with each one of these CDEs that on the daily basis, we are reaching out to these CDEs, we are taking our clients' projects, and we are making sure that we're strategically putting it in front of certain CDEs that we know are going to be interested in that type of project. Maybe that CDE loves doing manufacturing in rural areas. We'll know exactly who that CDE is and be able to work with them to just promote this project and help them understand those benefits. Once we'll move to phase 3 here. So once we find a CDE that says, yep, we want to provide allocation to this specific project, well, then we'll go through the closing process support. We'll work alongside the organization, and we're just going to help them bring the different key players to the table. The council, we're going to help with negotiating and coordinating just the closing process and work alongside the business. Next is phase 4, so compliance and reporting. We had kind of touched on a 7-year compliance. That's just something the business will have to do to provide just kind of annual metrics back to that CDE. Once they close a project, the CDE is going to say, okay, you said you're going to create 100 jobs, similar to these as the EDCs would understand it in the incentive agreement. You're committing to 100 jobs. Well, that's very similar to the CDE. Hey, you committed to 100 jobs. We want to make sure that you're on track to create those 100 jobs. So Ryan works alongside the business to make sure that there is a compliance and reporting process taking place so that they can provide those findings and those reports back to the CDE, and the CDE will then put it in the hands of the U.S. Treasury, the CDFI fund that manages the program, and it just keeps healthy. Everyone has, accountability for what they said they would do, and the funding is being utilized in a healthy way. And then phase five, the transaction unwind. So at the end of the 7 years, that's where we'll help the business to unwind the transaction, and they will be able to have that forgivable loan. We'll get all the key players together, the lawyers, the accountants, and make sure that that's a very smooth unwind process for the business. Okay, so this is where this becomes especially powerful for an EDC, and we just want to think through what is the role of economic development organizations in this larger new markets tax credit process here. So this is where EDCs can leverage new markets as a strategic tool. So we partner with EDC identify eligible sites and tenants. And just as importantly, we will pre-screen projects early so that you know what is a viable new markets project. Engaging early is key because it pins a project ahead of this allocation round, as Scott has mentioned, it's an annual cycle. So the earlier on that a company can know that they are eligible for new markets tax credits, it can make a significant difference in their business. And ultimately, this helps EDCs really support the local businesses in their area. So while providing additional value to incoming businesses that are coming in. So this leads directly into how an EDC can really have a competitive advantage for your region. So from an economic development perspective, this is where it can be a very powerful tool for you. So first, it is a hidden advantage over other site locations. A site layered with another potential 15 to 20% cost savings for a business can be a deciding factor in a competitive site selection. Second, it helps you win more deals without having to use your own budget. So because it is a federal incentive, there is no federal funding required. You you are able to bring additional value to the project without having to tap into your existing incentive funds or any additional funds pulling from other areas in the city. This is federal. It has nothing to do with your funding. Next, it's a great way to support existing business growth. So this isn't just about attraction, but it's also retention and expansion too. It can help current employers expand their operations. It can help them to finance new facilities. It can help them to even invest in major equipment. So just them knowing about it helps them to expand their business with additional, tapping into some additional funds, and it makes, a marginal difference to a project, and it can pencil a project out way quicker than a project who's evaluating, to not do a project due to not having the financing available. Third, it really helps with speed to market. So overall project feasibility really increases when you have new markets. If you can identify a new markets eligible tract early, it allows a company to really structure a deal faster and to build a stronger capital stack right from the beginning. So we've seen situations where this turns a project from a complete no-go into a go. And lastly, it's still a relatively underutilized tool, and this is where we see the real opportunity come in. So a lot of communities aren't actually leveraging new markets at all. But this is where those that do can differentiate their sites and guide a lot of the prospects that are coming and looking at open tracks and debating if to move their business into your community. This strategically and ultimately can help win more projects than other locations might miss. So that's exactly where Ryan comes in. And this is where we can help communities and businesses actually execute on these opportunities. And so you can see Ryan has been very active in the new markets tax credit space for many years. Our team of professionals, Ryan in general, has closed over 50 transactions, and this represents more than 1.1 billion in allocation that has gone into projects across 12 states. and these projects total over 1.8 billion in overall project cost. So lastly, too, it's important because we partner regularly with EDCs, and this is to help drive investment. This is to help create, this is with job creation and just regional growth. So it's really not theoretical for us. This is not just big numbers that we throw out here to make Ryan look good. It's actually something that we are actively executing across the country, across all of our larger credits and incentives practice as well. And so with that, I'm going to transition us over to a Q&A time with our team. I've seen a lot. I know our team has a lot of questions in the chat. So we'll go ahead and open that time up and go through some of those questions. Leah and Scott, I know we see quite a few here.
Yeah, and I've been trying to kind of whack-a-mole these, but I am far behind, given I talked a little bit longer than probably any of us expected, but such is me.
I think Scott and Brooke, can we start off by delving a little bit more into CDEs? They obviously hold the purse strings that they determine how their allocation will be spent. So maybe, and we really at the workshop could spend a whole hour just on on the CDEs. So maybe just give a little bit more time, even if we spent the rest of the time, because so many questions were on CDEs. Like, can an EDC form their own CDE? How do you find the CDEs? So just a lot of mystery behind these CDEs that I think would be helpful if we spent a little more time going over.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously CDEs are important. They are the gatekeepers here. What we wanted to make sure that you guys understand, and I've had this conversation with a lot of economic development officers through the South, but there is, I think, maybe a bit of a misunderstanding that this funding can't go to one of your projects if you don't have the CDE. That is very much not the case. This funding structure is really, as Brooke kind of mentioned, you are kind of step zero in the process. So you are identifying the projects that may have some of these compelling components that we've talked about. And then as far as getting the funding for the project, we are networking with those CDEs constantly. And so you don't need to have the CDE. You just need to understand new markets, and be able to, I guess, really get the project in touch with professionals that understand the marketplace, that understand how to navigate this process. And I think the better you can do at identifying these types of projects will probably send more of this investment to your neck of the woods. That being said, a number of CDEs, existing CDEs origins, are from kind of economic development offices or community development offices. So, local CDCs, local EDCs. So their worlds are intertwined. I wouldn't say that they're completely connected where you would need to create a CDE in order to get this funding. It's just a matter of understanding how this funding can drive benefit and then kind of getting them in touch with the people that can help them navigate the process.
And I do think when our new markets originally came out, companies who wanted to take advantage wanted to control the process. So they thought, well, I'll just set up my own CDE. And that did work maybe like the first 1 or 2 years. I don't find companies, and obviously they're not necessarily companies on here kind of setting up their own CDE per se, but can you talk about just how do you set up a CDE? Does it make sense to for them to try to set one up? It's just complicated to set one up and then to apply and get the allocation versus working with a CDE that already has allocation or getting in their application and you can look at their history. A lot of times it's Scott had the stats up like 100 something CDs received allocation. Of those, there were probably I mean, how many were really new, Scott, like the first time they ever got an allocation? Typically, you're seeing like repeat allocators, but not always. But
Yeah, I think this most recent round, and I can get you the actual answer, but I want to say it was less than five, maybe three.
out of over a
Just
hundred. So
yeah.
you're not, if you're looking at statistics, being a new CDE, you don't have that track record that the federal government's looking at to sort of invest in. So I just saw
So
so many questions about it. I could tell if you're kind of where this group could be going down that path, but the path of least resistance would be working with a CDE that kind of matches your project. So there's a New York CDE that all their kind of charter, so to speak, is to invest in charter schools. So you wouldn't go to them with a manufacturing project, for example, because that doesn't match what they told the government they would sort of invest in. And then there's some that are only healthcare, and then there's some that maybe only do the state of New York. So then you would know I'm not going to go to the CDE for that. But and then you could go to the three Florida-based ones, but maybe they just don't have allocation or you don't match. But that's where Ryan can kind of help if you have, you know, what sort of the use of your project is. There's another project we're working with the real estate broker up in Perry that's in a qualified, Scott called it a unicorn site because it sort of checked all the boxes. It's like if you could get the project, we can get to the allocation type of project. And sometimes we get the project, we're like, well, we hope we can get your allocation. There's no guarantees, but there's those sites where like you get the project, we got the allocation. But we honestly can't say that for every type of project because sometimes there's trends. So like mixed use was sort of in the very beginning was very hot for allocation. Then it was sort of not hot, or like a food desert with grocery stores. They were getting a lot of allocation. Well, now they're not as popular now, the grocery stores, but healthcare is kind of more popular. And Scott had talked about the affordable housing. But we're happy to set up even separate calls if you have certain sites and you know kind of what the use of it is, and even just walk you through it. Again, this is what the workshop will do too, is how to navigate. Do you have a qualified area and what color of the qualified area are you? Because just because you're qualified doesn't mean necessarily that you'll get the allocation.
yeah, to kind of piggyback, at least on the early part of what you were saying, Aaliyah, when a CDE applies, they need to demonstrate a 5-year track record of deploying loans and investments in low-income communities. Um, and obviously, you want to, it would probably be a waste of your time if you don't have that track record to then seek this funding, because they want to see that you have that experience in targeting these particular areas. And so typically if that is something that your EDC office is already doing, you would stand a better chance to then try to create your own CDE. But because it's a 5-year track record that they look at, it would need to be kind of part of a larger master plan to get up to speed, to initiate some of the programming so that you can build this track record over time. Because if you're going to apply without having any experience, you will likely be wasting your time to receive that funding. There were a number of other comments and questions in here about what percent of the loan can be forgiven. So it's really going to be that 15% is going to be. So as Brooke mentioned, if you think of the entire 100%, you've got the 15% that is provided by the new market subsidy, and then you've got the 85% that is your other sources. It's really going to be that 15%. And then the mechanism to have that forgiven is you effectively, not you, excuse me, the project buys that loan for $1,000. So they buy their own loan, and that effectively cancels that debt.
And I
Uh,
think it'll make more sense in the workshop, Scott, because when I hear you say that, I think 15% of the loan is forgiven. Now we're all recorded by AI and on the record. I think you mean of the total project costs, you're looking at a loan of 15%. right? And then that loan, we'll just call it the new markets loan, is forgiven. So it's really like the whole new markets component of your transaction. And that's why the workshop has to be all day. They want us to put together like a numerical example. Like there's another question on here on, well, how flexible are the loan terms? Is it interest only? Like, because obviously the concern is if I'm paying principal for 7 years, that's a big chunk. And so it is kind of mostly a interest only over that time period. And then that loan that's related to, it's just hard to cover the numbers aspect of this in kind of a 1 hour because first you got to get the acronyms down, then you have to understand how you qualify. And that's why, again, super excited to, for those of you that like to run the numbers, we'll have that part of the workshop. But the new markets component is forgiven at the end of the 7 years. There is some cost to it because you're paying the interest over the time period, but it's very favorable interest terms. So it sort of has a twofold, the forgivable loan at the end and then the low interest over the time period that if you would look at it otherwise, you would have to be covering that with like higher debt. So it decreases the debt amount. There was a question to like how much working capital can cover. I've always kind of thought of it as like 1 to 2 million after, but not sure if there's a um, an exact formula of how much working capital can be used for a project to qualify that cost.
Yeah, they define it to be a reasonable amount of working capital, which obviously is very ambiguous. And professionals, so accounting professionals have kind of coalesced and um, uh, decided that that's really kind of about 12 months of working capital is what they consider that to be. Is that's the reasonable amount. And there's a safe harbor associated with that reasonable amount of working capital. But each CDE can, within the scope of that, can have their own particular itch that they're attempting to scratch. So somebody might say, I don't want to do payroll as part of my particular CDE strategy, but I am fine helping you fund, purchase of raw materials or whatever it may be. Um, and which is why it's important to maintain these relationships with the different CDEs because you're not going to be able to see what they said in their application. But if you're in constant contact with them, then they're going to tell you, and you're going to know because you've brought an opportunity to them that they had to pass on for one of those reasons. The technical answer is a reasonable amount of working capital. From a practical standpoint, Aaliyah, about $1 to $2 million is generally kind of what we see. Um,
Because you're not really going to finance $100 million project. The suite, you could have $100 million project, but you want to carve out like a component of that that's in the 10 to $20 million range. You can kind of, there's a lot of costs involved with these. So kind of the lowest amount of a project would probably be about 7 million, they say for total project cost. But sort of last question, I think we've left them wanting to know more, so we'll have a lot of people at the workshop. The last question from Tom Ryan is about the wage requirements. Can you touch a little bit more about that?
so there's not technically a requirement, though the definition of a quality job is one that pays the MIT living wage. So I'm not sure if you guys use that as a measure in your other programs, but a quality job is one that pays a living wage, which is published by MIT annually for the county. I think it also goes by MSA. And then quality job could also be a job that has access to benefits or a job that offers training and advancement opportunities. And then within that quality job definition, each CDE may say you need to hit all three of these marks, or other CDEs may just be okay if you hit one of those marks. But those are the definitions of a quality job. So each individual county has a different measure of what MIT considers to be a living wage. We've seen people communicate the wage against prevailing wages. So that is technically a way that you could do it as well. Sometimes MIT living wage doesn't seem like a very good bearing point. Um, because it comes, from Massachusetts and not necessarily boots on the ground. So if there's a local prevailing wage, then that could be a measure that you try to use as your benchmark.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Scott and Brooke. Hopefully, Florida EDC can see why you need experts in this area. And I can see Casey's wanting to wrap it up as well. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, we should be the ones thanking you. And I think if the intent was to whet the appetite of the Florida economic development community, I think it's been mission accomplished. So thank you so much for your expertise today. And I think you're going to get a very active workshop in a few short weeks. So thank you so much to the team at Ryan, Aaliyah, and all. Let's end on time and wish you a great day. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Feel
you.
free to email.
And that I think we can leave this screen up for just a little bit as folks drop off.
Excellent work, everybody.
Thank you. Now we need some dates, Beth. Well, let me know when you can't do it or if you have preferred timings for
We
the
will
workshop.
do that. I'll get with Mary and we'll send you some dates. Appreciate everybody. This was phenomenal.
Thank you. Everybody
Great.
stay dry. Florida's a little wet today.
I'll tell you what, I brought my rain prevention umbrella device with me today. I don't know if it's going to work. We'll see. All
Coming
right.
from both coasts. Thanks. Have a great day.
All right. Take care, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.